Hi everyone, it's Miss Richmond again. We are going to talk today about the US economy and the society in the 1920s and how we had this roaring era of prosperity that came to a gigantic crash with the collapse of the stock market. So first we're going to go ahead and get started talking about some innovations and some inventions that were taking place during the 1920s. One of those major society changing events that happened was the invention of the assembly line for a production style that was made popular by Henry Ford. So Henry Ford was making cars and he thought it would be a lot easier and cheaper if people could specialize in the very specific part of the car that they were building, and then we move that piece onto the next person and they add to it. The first car that Henry Ford created is in the bottom right hand corner of the picture collage. It was called a quadricycle because it was basically a bicycle, but instead of having two wheels, it had four. It had a bench. The steering wheel is this little knob that is coming out of the front of the vehicle. And that was his first type of car. With the expansion of the assembly line, he was able to make the cars more complex and utilize different styles of motors. And he was able to build up the Model T and create more models of the car that people could buy. This allowed it to spread in popularity because there were more to purchase, and it allowed for people to drive further, which helped create suburbs just outside the city instead of everybody having to live in the urban center or downtown region. You could live a little bit outside the city and move into the city freely on a daily basis to do any business that you had using your car. Some other inventions that took place in the 1920s, radios became very popular, so we could get messages out to people on the regular. Music was able to expand because people could sit in their own homes and listen to music, which wasn't widely popular up until this point because it wasn't accessible. We also had some movies being created, silent movies that people could go and watch at theaters, as well as seeing advertisements for the very first time in a picture, in a movie, in film. Before this, advertisements were limited to newspaper print, and that was the only way you could see them. We also had some new appliances coming about, which made life easier. Over in the picture collage to the left, we have the stove and oven, which was a major improvement over cooking over a fire. So here we have the flat top where you could put pots and pans, and there were levers to turn on those burners to cook on. We also have down here for you to use as an oven. Over here could be used as an oven. There's some shelves and some storage built into your stove. Over to the right hand side in the bottom, we have a washing machine. No more filling up a bucket and doing it on your own. You had a machine that would help take care of some of that laborious part of the routine. And a lot of Americans at this point couldn't afford to purchase these luxury items like the cars or the radios, the washing machines, the stoves and ovens up front with cash. So there was a new type of purchasing arrangement that was allowing people to buy these products, and they were buying them on something that's known as credit. They would pay a little bit upfront, and then they would pay installments or a monthly or weekly fee until they were able to pay off the entire purchase. They would pay interest to make it worthwhile for the people who were selling them the product, but it allowed Americans to get product into their hands a lot quicker, and it allowed for those manufacturers to sell a lot more product because people didn't have to save up over time and then make one big purchase. So while we have a lot of innovations taking place, we also have a couple of cultural movements happening across America. In the 1920s, there is a movement to make the manufacturing and the sale of alcohol illegal across the United States. This is known as prohibition. There's an amendment that is put into place. It's the 18th Amendment. It also includes the Volstead Act that made it illegal to manufacture, possess, or sell alcohol across the United States. Once this went into effect, they would pour giant barrels, bottles of alcohol, whatever they could find, down into the sewers to get rid of them so that people couldn't be tempted to drink. And the goal was to get it so that the United States would become a dry country, meaning that there was no sale of alcohol. People weren't partaking in using of alcohol or liquor. But while it helped a little bit, bringing down those drinking levels for Americans, it really just helped create a mafia and some organized crime across the United States because people still wanted their alcohol, they still wanted to drink. So it just went underground. There was a big black market for it, so the mafia was able to make a lot of money from that. There was also a really big tax loss that the United States government felt because the government would tax that alcohol at a very high percentage, and people who are partaking in drinking alcohol are okay with paying that tax because they want to partake. So that was a big cut into the budget for the United States government, and the 18th Amendment doesn't last very long. It's passed in 1919, and by 1933, it's going to be repealed in the 21st Amendment, undoing the amendment so that the United States could once again manufacture, possess, and sell alcohol without fear of going to jail or being persecuted in any way. Schooling is going to change significantly in the 1920s as well. At this point, there are some public schools, but a lot of churches are trying to get involved in what is being taught in those public schools at this point in time. The public schools were teaching the idea of evolution in those schools, but the Christians wanted it to be a creation-based only curriculum for students to be learning about, and they try to ban the teachings of evolutionism, and it's mostly in Southern schools that this takes place, but a man by the name of John Scopes is going to attempt to teach it anyways because he feels that even if students are Christian, they should be exposed to different ideas on the way in which the world was founded and let them form their own opinions on whether or not it's creationism or evolutionism and have all of the facts in front of them So he's going to teach it to his students anyways. He makes a couple of enemies by doing this. He's put on trial because he's doing something that's against the law. He does get some high-powered attorneys to work for him, to defend him. And in the end of the battle, he does lose his case. He loses the trial. He was told that he was going to have to pay a $100 fine, which in the 1920s was a lot of money. But it was never enforced that he had to pay that. It was a technicality. And the important thing that came out of this, though, is that Tennessee never seriously attempted to stop anybody from teaching evolution in schools again. While it was a law there for a long time that you weren't allowed to teach it, they stopped trying to enforce that law. So if a teacher felt that it was in the best interest of students to teach it, then they were able to teach it, and nothing was done to them because of that. During the 1920s, we also see the women's liberation movement becoming a major aspect in pushing what was normal within the culture of the United States. Typically at this point, up until this point in time, if women were out on a date, it was arranged by a family member and there was a chaperone involved, and women only dated one man, and the purpose was to find a husband and get married quickly. Up in the 1920s, we have women who start to push those boundaries. I'm not going to date one person. I'm going to date multiple people. I'm going to see what's out there. I'm going to go out. I'm going to dance. I'm going to have a good time. I'm going to wear short dresses and high heels and cut my hair and wear makeup and do what I want to do. These women became known as flappers. And because women were out and dating in a more casual setting, birth control became incredibly popular and something that women wanted to know about. In the 1920s, a woman named Margaret Sanger became very widely known across the United States because she was incredibly passionate about educating women on the birth control methods that were available to them. She was so well known about her teachings that she was forced to flee to England for a while to avoid persecution. She returned in 1921 and created Planned Parenthood so that women could get accurate, unbiased medical help in the area of birth control and women's health in general. All of this is taking place during the 1920s. We're building up society and the stock market. People are out buying a lot of things. They're buying something for small in hopes that they're going to be able to sell it for much larger later, known as flipping it. People are buying stocks that haven't bought stocks before because they're able to buy them on something known as the margin, where you pay for a little bit now in hopes of being able to pay off the rest later. You're promising like, oh, I'll pay that later. And for the most part, that was working, but eventually the stock market's going to begin to crash. People who promise to pay later can't. They don't have the money. Those investors start to lose out on money. The stocks that they hope to sell to pay their own margins are now no longer available. And we see this like quick avalanche starting to take place. And this like avalanche collapse of the stock market is what leads into the economic crisis that takes place in the 1930s that's known as the Great Depression. The Great Depression starts in 1929. It lasts most of the 1930s. It begins with that stock market crash, and by 1933, 25% of Americans are unemployed. There's 5,000 banks that have went out of business, and you have the presidents during this time working to try to build up the economy in a way that had never been seen before. Herbert Hoover is going to start to reconstruct the finance system And then FDR is going to start the New Deal.